Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. We have a good one for you. As always, we're going to do a 4-story show today, but try and keep the stories of varying length. We're going to talk about the U.S. job market as the economy gradually cools. We are seeing job growth staying relatively pretty solid. We're better than last month, but not as good as September. 199,000 jobs added. Then we're going to do some political education, some very important political education, I might add, about one of the countries that we're all thinking so much about at the moment, and we love to do so, frankly. It is Israel and the really interesting, and when I say interesting, I mean hateful backgrounds of the current Israeli government with the help of the Edgar Mentum breakdown. And also, it's a very Substack-themed show today. So we're going to break down a Li Fang post, I believe that's how you say his name, about a really surprisingly well-coordinated network of influential figures throughout various industries pushing pro-Israel propaganda. And speaking of the pro-Israel lobby that we know is really kicking into overdrive in the political arena at the moment, George Latimer has announced his candidacy against Representative Jamaal Bowman in New York's 16th Congressional District. Latimer is set to receive hundreds of thousands of dollars from AIPAC over the course of his campaign. But first, it is important to start at the top with the economy. The U.S. economy continued to pump out jobs in November, suggesting there is still juice left in a labor market that has been almost imperceptibly slowing since last year's pandemic rebound. Employers added 199,000 jobs last month, and the Labor Department reported Friday, while the unemployment rate dropped to 3.7% from 3.9%. So 2 points down in unemployment, so a good ranking, and then 199,000 job addition, with inflation still continuing to go down, and something that a lot of people said could not be done. And I think, I always thought, I talked about it for quite a long period of time on the show, it was a very risky situation. But I still do think we are coming to a very interesting point in the equation where it's like, how long are you going to keep going to this? How long are you going to keep applying pressure on the economy from the from the top, from the Federal Reserve, and when is that going to start to have the impact that we all know it's very, very possible that this could have? So I think that is definitely something to consider here. Even so, though, the report signals that the economy remains far from recession territory, despite a year and a half of interest rate increases that have weighed on consumer spending and business investment. And I think that, could be, and obviously it brings the question is, the broader thing is, why is this economy so bad? Which I think is very, very important. It's important to say the increase in employment does include tens of thousands of auto workers and actors who have returned to their jobs after strikes, and others in related businesses that have been stalled by walkouts, meaning underlying job growth is slightly weaker. Even so, the report does signal that we are in pretty good shape despite a year and a half of interest rate increases that have weighed on consumer spending and business investment, reinforcing the picture of energetic labor demand. Wages they have both jumped 0.4% over the last month, more than expected, and the work week lengthened slightly. That I think is a very interesting picture, because we are seeing what is just generally, objectively, very, very good job and economy situations, but we are not seeing that obviously translate for Joe Biden and in the kind of political arena, because we're seeing good numbers. We're seeing this soft landing coming in, and the numbers definitely on the front line are good. Look at unemployment going relatively steady, not in some ways taking up, taking down, just happening to take up this month, tick down this month with the addition of jobs as opposed to last month. But more broadly speaking, and inflation going as well, pretty solidly, coming down way down from where it was 1-2 years ago. But the broader picture there is still very, very problematic for Biden. And this just general, I think, and I'm no expert. I've seen and tried to, compile, a lot of different sources and things on this, because I think it is kind of a almost like paradoxical situation, because, I feel like there's a lot of different explanations out there for, why Biden is getting hit so hard on the economy when so at least the top line numbers, and seemingly also a fair bit of the underlying numbers are pretty good. But there's a lot of people out there saying, oh, it's just TikTok, it's just the Fox News, it's the way people are perceiving the media today. And I feel like that is, I've heard that explanation from a lot of kind of establishment people, mostly kind of establishment Democratic type people, when things don't go their way in the past. And I feel like it's always a little bit too easy. There, is certainly a part of that. I think it's probably a multi-factor, kind of not black and white situation, which always sucks, but that's how it is sometimes. But I think you have that, but you also have COVID programs ending, and you also have, I think what's kind of important in that report there, which by the way was from the New York Times, about the interest rates, is the feeling that things are just generally tightening, things are getting more precarious, like the ability to take out loans, and the various just general flowing of money throughout the economy becoming more and more expensive, which, understandably does in some ways tend to freak some people out. Anyway, we're going to go now to our next story. It's a very, very interesting and important story, probably a pretty long one, but it is a complete profile of just some of the random quotes and just the backgrounds and past lives of the current 37th, I believe, 37th government of Israel. So, and it's by, of course, Edinger Mentum on Substack. He starts off with Otzma Yehudit, major player. It is you may have heard of him, Minister of National Security, Itamar ben-gvir, and Otzma, the party, the Otzma Yehudit party, translates to, I think this is actually quite interesting when you think about how this would come off if you put any other group there in that situation. Normally when you put racial group or ethnic group plus power, that generally does not come out to be a pretty good equation. But the party it translates to Jewish power. So the Jewish Power Party, which is led by Itamar ben-gvir. He says, Edinger Mentum writes, to start, we have the single most unfortunate fact for Hezbollah, which is the Israeli propagandist assigned with the selling Zionism to the world's progressive Jews. The fact is the existence and the relevance of Itamar ben-gvir, just literally someone who was so far right years ago that the Israelis even arrested him for racism. I think Israeli internal police forces were like, this guy's suitable for detention. He was called an Arab or anti-Arab terrorist, called Kahanist, associated with the very, very right-wing Israeli rabbi, and he was also very, very famously had a picture for many, many years of a guy named Baruch Goldstein, who killed 25 people in the 1990s in a mosque who were praying, obviously Palestinian Arabs or Muslims. So that is something that really kind of does, I think, it's like if you had a picture of, I don't know, Dylan Roof in your office and put it in a place of, high praise and prominence, even if you didn't, it would still be weird. But he put it apparently, high above, right on his desk, in a very positional prominence, which I think is very, telling anecdote and what you need to know about him. So he writes, if Ben-Gvir did not actually exist, any description of him would come across as a crude, over-the-top parody of Zionism. Currently running the ministry that once singled him out as a good candidate for detention, Ben-Gvir has dedicated his entire life to anti-Arab racism. And that's, some people are like, oh, come on. But wait, listen to this. Starting as a teenager, he moved around between several organizations that advocated for the ethnic cleansing of Arabs until settling on Koch, which is a fascist political party led by the convicted Israeli-American terrorist Meher Kahane. Koch, which was designated as a terrorist organization by the United States, the European Union, and Israel itself, disavowed democracy and called for Israel to turn to a theocratic ethno-state in the world, all of Palestine and Jordan. This is the really maximalist extent of religious / revisionist Zionism, just going for really what the Bible, because if you look at the Bible, the Torah, says is when they think of Greater Israel, they think of not just the borders of historic Palestine, they think of a large chunk of Jordan, and I believe all the way it's like from like the Euphrates River, I believe at some points, and cutting up through the northern part of Saudi Arabia. It is a massive. If you look up, typing it in, I don't know if you can hear right now, the Greater Israel map. It is really quite shocking. So this is, Netanyahu brings this to the Middle East. I'm talking about the new Middle East. There was that was the one where he just completely, swallowed up a good chunk of southern Lebanon. But the Greater Israel prophetically is, pretty much the northern, I guess, third of Saudi Arabia, the eastern half of Iraq, all of Jordan, the south and the western half of Iraq, all of Jordan, the western half of Syria, all of Lebanon, and much of Egypt so it's like from the Euphrates to the Nile, essentially. Really just filling that in, and of course the Mediterranean Sea around that, and probably even go into a little bit of Turkey in this map. So this is what he's talking about, with this kind of Greater Israel idea, that a theocratic ethno-state in the world. Again, all Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, they're all, supposed to be parts of them annexed by the Jewish state. Arabs who came under Israeli control would either flee or be enslaved. All territory under Israeli control would be, this Meher Kahane, who was, assassinated, I think, he was a figure of the 80s and the 90s. So really not long ago at all. Arabs who came under Israeli control would be either flee or be enslaved. All territory under Israeli control would be opened up for Jewish settlement. Marriage and sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews would be banned. The army would be given shoot-to-kill orders against anyone who attempted to resist this regime. Because of how extreme this is, you may be wondering if I'm exaggerating things, but I'm not. All you have to do is see where Kahane and his followers stood to look at the laws he proposed while just to see where he was, just the laws he proposed while he was in Israel, the bills he introduced in Israeli parliament, because yes, he was in Israeli parliament. One of the bills was non-Jews in the state of Israel will be without any national rights and without any part of the political proceedings in the state of Israel. A non-Jew will not be able to be appointed to any position of authority and will not be able to vote in any elections to the Knesset or to any other state and public body. There's another one. Non-Jews will be obligated to assume duties, taxes, and slavery. Duties, taxes, and slavery? Come on. At least two of the three. Come on. Just be generous here. If he does not agree to slavery and taxes, he will be forcibly deported. A non-Jew will not live within the jurisdiction of the city of Jerusalem, and a non-Jew who has a martial relationship with a Jew is liable to 50 years in prison. A Jewish prostitute or a Jewish male who has an affair with a non-Jewish male is sentenced to 5 years in prison. And ben-gvir served as this party's youth coordinator. Today, Koch no longer exists. The party was faced a mortal blow with Kahane's 1990 assassination and was officially banned in Israel in 1994 after party supporter Baruch Goldstein, as we talked about earlier, went on a shooting spree and murdered 29 people in a Hebron mosque. And it goes to talk about the picture of Baruch Goldstein. Ben-gvir first came to public attention in the mid-1990s as a hardline activist against then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, the Oslo Accords, and just the general idea of peace with the Palestinians. So, interestingly, he is a Mizrahi Jew, so he's from, I believe, Iraq. I'm not exactly sure. Well, one of the Middle Eastern countries. So it does go to show you that some of these people, despite being really discriminated against as when they came into Israel at the first place, and despite the fact that the current Israeli government is much, much more filled with, kind of whiter Jews, at least in the leadership. If you look at Netanyahu, if you look at I think the war cabinet there they have Benny Gantz, Bezalel Smotrich, these are people who are definitely more of European heritage, shall we say. And they have also had a big history of racism against them. But he is really just somebody who is quite racist in just a wide variety of ways. We go on to talk about it for quite a while. But anyway, we have the Party of Religious Zionism, or the National Religious Party. This is Bezalel Smotrich's party. And he's kind of like the slightly less crazy guy, but let's see, or portrayed as that, but let's see how less crazy he really is. So, Smotrich represents the more explicitly religious elements of the country's ultra-nationalist right. While he does not have a direct history with the violence of Kahanism the way ben-gvir does, many of his policies are essentially indistinguishable from ben-gvir's. This is unfortunate for those who wish to write off the recently elected Ben-Gvir as a one-off, because Smotrich has been a relevant player in Israeli politics for quite some time. He was first elected in 2015 to parliament, and he has served happily within Netanyahu's coalition throughout his career, an allegiance that has won him 2 cabinet-level titles in the past, including Minister of Transportation from 19 to 20 and Minister of Finance, the most powerful economic position he currently holds at the moment. In addition to that, he also heads the administration of a large part of the West Bank, with a portfolio specifically dedicated to developing illegal Jewish settlements. Very important. Apparently his philosophy, according to Edinger Mentum, is defined by 2 things: intense cultural conservatism and a hatred towards Palestinians. This is a guy who declared himself, and Israeli Arabs, it's important to say, he has declared himself a fascist homophobe who has dedicated much of his political life to suppressing Israel's LGBT community, which is also a great thing that, a lot of these liberal Zionists who like to talk about how, wonderful Tel Aviv is for the gays and all that stuff. They should, I think, listen to this guy and take note of the fact that he is currently in the government. So Smotrich is somebody who has called gay Israelis, let's be clear, beasts, and refers to pride parades as beast parades. In fact, one of Smotrich's first acts in public life was when he helped organize his own beast parade, so-called beast parade, wherein he marched animals through the streets of Jerusalem to protest against the city's pride parade. While the politician has claimed that those are just his opinions, and he won't act on them by saying stoning gays to death, his platform for his party says otherwise. Smotrich's father, Chaim Smotrich, spent much of his life advocating for the overturning of Israel's secular legal system in favor of a system based on halachic, or religious, law, thereby turning Israel into a theocracy, just like Iran. And also, they have a picture of him speaking in front of the map of Greater Israel there, on the podium of where he's speaking, and they have, I think that's Gahan in the background that they have, but I may not be I'm not entirely confident about that. Smotrich has been attempting to harm Palestinians for a period of time spanning well before his entry, though, into electoral politics. While his criminal record is not as lengthy as Ben-Gvir's, it includes what is easily the most infamous act between the two. In 2005, Smotrich was arrested and detained for 3 weeks over his involvement in a plan to block cars and damage infrastructure to protest the then government's unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. So he's trying to stop people, damage the road, stop people from leaving. Under most circumstances, such an arrest would have been hardly unusual for a figure like Smotrich, except for one thing that made it highly alarming. His group had allegedly planned to stash nearly 200 gallons of gasoline they planned to use to blow up cars on the highway at rush hour. While Smotrich has feverishly denied this part of the story, it has been seconded by none other than former Shin Bet deputy Yitzhak Ilhan, who personally interrogated Smotrich during his detention. While it's worth noting that Ilan said that this while running as a member of a party in the anti-Netanyahu opposition, he still has a great degree of credibility. In the event, Smotrich does not deny his role in organized opposition to the withdrawal plan, but he's regularly threatened and sometimes engaged in violence. So, let's go now to the big one, Likud. That is Benjamin Netanyahu's party. we got to kind of break it down. They're both, the two guys we just talked about, Ben-gvir and Smotrich, they're obviously very influential players in Israel. They control some of the country's most powerful and important ministries, especially as it concerns Palestinian policy. At the same time, they're also offhandedly referred to as marginal, which belies their influence and their kind of really controlling role in the key policies of the Israeli government. But it definitely is true. If you look at the poll, these guys are going to be, definitely in the bottom half, shall we say. So Ben-gvir's and Smotrich's parties have 6 and 7 seats respectively, making them definite, minority parties. Together, they actually hold fewer seats than the country's 2 religious parties, who are very important players in the country's government, but also difficult to analyze since they determine their policies based on what religious leaders say. And they both pale in comparison to Likud, Israel's sole remaining major party at the heart of its political right. Likud's leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, needs no introduction. He's Likud, and Likud is him. While the party is, on paper, the country's secular, mainstream right-wing political force, it would be more accurately described in recent years as a personality cult for Israel's longest-serving prime minister. His policies are their policies on everything, including on issues contentious as Palestine. I've gone over the nature of Netanyahu's strategy during his tenure as prime minister in previous articles and interviews, but if you want the long and short of it, it's this. He's dedicated his entire life to preventing the creation of a Palestinian state. He's changed his rhetoric and moved the goalposts depending on the international climate, but that's the upshot of it. When Netanyahu first won the Likud leadership in the early 1990s, he virulently opposed, and I think this is a very, kind of underrated point, he opposed and also was one of the people most blamed in politics, when, someone gets shot, and they blame the people who, said a bunch of bad things about him. The people they were blaming, the person they were blaming at the time for the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, the person who, was the single most, I guess, peaceful Israeli, but, also has a incredibly dark past of his own. But he was shot, by, in terms of many people, in the eyes of many, analysts of the situation, he was shot due to, in no small part, obviously not the whole thing, but in no small part due to the speeches and the incitement of Benjamin Netanyahu. So after being kicked out of power in 1999, after an old generation of Israelis rightfully recognized that he had no commitment to peace whatsoever, he handed off Likud leadership to Ariel Sharon, who brought him back to power as the country's Minister of Finance following Sharon's 2003 election victory. This tenure wherein he applied a Thatcherite economic policy regime, and he's not just far out in Palestine, that brought the country significant foreign investment, helped rehabilitate his career. However, his time in power would come to an abrupt end after Likud cracked up over Sharon's support for unilateral withdrawal from Gaza. Netanyahu resigned in protest over Sharon's move, and Sharon left his own party to start a big tent centrist coalition, and Netanyahu moved in to retake the leadership of the rump Likud. So he got that back, and by 2006, Likud got 9% of the vote, hardly better than any other country's pensioner party. I don't really know what that means, but whatever. Through corruption scandals, indictments, and countless regional flare-ups, Netanyahu has remained in office almost continuously following his victory since 2009. And what a time it's been. Netanyahu has also been the architect of Israel's current approach towards Palestine, centered around the complete dispossession, first and foremost, of Palestinian land. He did a mockery of peace talks, broke the back of the Israeli left, and did the heavy lifting to get figures like Smotrich and Ben-gvir in parliament in the first place. Throughout it all, his administration has presided over endless settlement expansion, violation of international law, and human rights abuses. This is, really somebody who has perfectly, I think, represented the modern face of the Israeli right, and a perfect encapsulation of the direction of travel from the country. And pro-Israel PR flags think that pointing this out is unfair. They think that it's all unfair. Ben-gvir, Smotrich, Netanyahu, they're just politicians, and most Israelis don't even like them, except for the fact they're democratically elected by those same people they purport to not like. But anyway, you can't judge a country based on who it elects. After all, wouldn't it be unfair for someone to denounce the United States because of Trump? Well, putting that aside, you can absolutely do that, the first thing. And the second thing would be, that well, we did elect him, so it doesn't not say anything about, just who we are as a country. I think it's pretty fair to say. But, it is important to say with Netanyahu, there was a certain point where describing Netanyahu's beliefs becomes less of an act of profiling a specific individual and more of a description of Israeli policy. Essentially, everything the country does and engages in comes from him, which is especially concerning, if you look at how he's been talking lately with the Amalek rhetoric and all that stuff. He is, when it comes down to it, it's important to stand these other players, but it comes down to it, he is the straw that stirs the drink in Israeli politics, and has been for, arguably the last 10 years at the very, very least, but, really for a lot longer. All right, we go down to our next story, and it really is a pretty shocking one. We have to go through it, way too fast, but it really is a pretty crazy thing. So, as the Israeli-Hamas war began to, the story here essentially kind of starts with this anecdote. It talks about how there was this woman named Courtney Carey who posted in Irish. I'm not going to say it, but it's Freedom for Palestine in Irish. But yeah, so within 24 hours of Carey's posting on LinkedIn, Alon Ozer, a Miami-based investor, took a screenshot of the post and shared it with a WhatsApp group of more than 300 like-minded investors, tech executives, activists, and at least one senior Israeli government official. Ozer took care to note that Carey worked for Wix. Oded Hermoni, a tech journalist turned venture capitalist, piped up to assure to everyone that Batsheva Moshe, who is Wix's general manager for Israel and member of the group chat, had been on it since Saturday night. So they pretty much, really revealing what is just, even through a WhatsApp group, a really surprising amount of coordination between a lot of, for a lot of the narratives and a lot of, the coordinated cancelings that we see on a lot of these, just actors, just people in just people throughout civil society, entertainment figures, agents. We've even seen just completely be out of a job, and this woman here was obviously out of a job. So Li Fong has here records requests, or has obtained records of the group's WhatsApp messages dating back to mid-October, in an intricate spreadsheet where group participants request and claim tasks ranging from social media responses to IDF supporting shipments. Separately, we have viewed a number of video meetings showing best practices for Hasbara, an Israeli term for the art of public diplomacy, whose detractors see it as a euphemism for propaganda. It literally means explanation or something like that, which is just about explaining what Israel's doing and why they're doing it. Which normally, there tend to be some pretty tough explanations, but they offer a window here into Israel's public relations war that is not limited to the tech sector. In addition to Moshe, the WhatsApp group includes prominent Silicon Valley venture capitalists, shall we say financier, a guy named Jeff Epstein, former CEO of Oracle, or CFO of Oracle. Of course it's not that Jeff Epstein, but it's just coincidental. He's a former CFO of Oracle, and Andy David, a diplomat turned venture capitalist who serves as the Israeli Foreign Ministry's head of innovation, entrepreneurship, and tech. So it's an Israeli Foreign Ministry government official. The WhatsApp group is officially named the J Ventures Global Kibbutz Group. It's a project of J Ventures, a U.S.-Israeli investment fund that styles itself as a capitalist kibbutz. A reference to Israel as historically collectivist. If you don't know, but they're just essentially kind of Jewish collectivist farming communities. But this is somehow capitalist. Hermoni is the WhatsApp group's founder. He's the journalist turned venture capitalist and the managing director of J Ventures. And David, the foreign ministry official, is internally listed by J Ventures as a member of the PR/political team that makes decisions on messaging and lobbying. So, yeah, it really is some pretty remarkable stuff. And as Eli Clifton of Quincy Institute puts it, this is a peek under the hood of how U.S. foreign policy is steered in order to produce policy outcomes. This is how, the manipulators of this foreign policy, and this specifically this Israel policy. And again, I think we should just go boop, disclaimer. Pause the tape here, because I think it is important to say it is not, to imply that there is obviously, these people are, I'm sure, vast majority Jewish, but they're not doing it because they're Jewish. They're just doing it because they're in a position to, they care deeply about Israel. They care about the Zionist project. And they are, they're not trying to, part of a Jewish conspiracy to control the world or anything like that. But they are, just like, many other lobbying efforts out there, part of a very effective effort, honestly more effective than most, that does a lot in steering foreign policy, especially obviously with the Israel situation, but also in other places, like with regards to Iran. And this is a, pretty good demonstration of how that all works. So just days after the October 7th surprise attack on Israel from Hamas, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Cornicus, I just want to call him that, just comes off the tongue better, spokesperson for the IDF, beamed into a Zoom meeting to brief these pro-Israel activists from Silicon Valley. The participants include major venture capitalists and tech execs, such as Jordan Blaszczak, president of America's Frontier Fund, a national security investment firm backed by former Google CEO Eric Schmidt. There is still some ongoing fight. There is still some ongoing sporadic crashes and attacks by Hamas terrorists in southern Israel, Cornicus said, since he was speaking to the group on an unencrypted open line. Cornicus cautioned he could not divulge too many secrets, but he added the war would soon escalate with an Israeli military response, and the participants on the call could lend a hand. The IDF spokesperson encouraged them on the call to assist with maintaining pressure on legislatures in Congress to work to influence them, those in universities or media, think tanks, or in elite circles. Working to do this very explicitly. So they come in here as the massacre really gets started in Gaza. The group, which also includes their Fang Reds here. The group, which also includes individuals associated with AIPAC, have worked tirelessly to fire employees and punish activists for expressing pro-Palestinian views. It seems to be, honestly, mostly focused on cancel culture and just getting people, kicked out of public life, which is also, it sounds kind of, stupid and petty, but it is actually very much something that does have a clear chilling effect on people's willingness to, speak out. I can speak from personal experience, in the university context, it has definitely had a chilling effect in my experience, not just since the October 7th attack, but honestly long before that, because teachers would just be very, very, clam up around the topic, do a lot of qualifiers, people who are, normally very much straight shooters, not, very confident in their statements, suddenly became very, very wishy-washy, whether it be professors or whether it be students, around statements of Israel and Palestine. So it's an important thing there to take into context. And one presentation that David shared made the case that Hamas initially stations its military operations. Excuse me. This is the government official. He's making his case that Hamas intentionally stations its military operations near civilian sites as part of its strategy as deploying human shields. Remember when we were still talking about human shields? It was 3-4 weeks ago. I don't know. But of course, UN officials have discovered Hamas rockets hidden in a vacant school in the past, and indeed, the militant group's vast underground tunnel network does, Fang is saying here, endangering civilians throughout the Gaza Strip. Yet, the recent IDF document uses broad categories to identify Hamas military sites, Israeli targets, including a Hamas bank located next to a Palestinian kindergarten. Israeli officials have invested heavily in shaping the narrative about its war on social media, viewing online discourse as a vital area for maintaining public support. Last month, a spokeswoman for the IDF and the Israel Office Director of Bessemer Venture Partners, the venture capital firm where Jeff Epstein is an operating partner, again, not that Jeffrey Epstein, jointly led a Zoom workshop for high-tech leaders on tactics for scoring victories in the public discourse on Twitter /X. So, yeah, they're just one of these, broader groups in the U.S. Jewish community in supporting more, kind of conventional charity efforts for Israel. But I think this, level of coordination and this level of just, working together, especially on these kind of coordinated cancellation campaigns, I think it's very interesting to know just in terms of understanding how, in a way grassroots, but also in a way top down, this effort is because, just a bunch of people coming together in WhatsApp groups, but all those people, just happen to be incredibly powerful and incredibly, just be in the right places to get anyone who would be critical of Palestine completely fired in a very swift fashion. All right, yeah. So important. I do encourage you to go check out the whole article there on Li Fang's Substack. All right, back to this report here in the New York Times. With Nicholas Vandos. After months of public deliberation and prodding from donors aligned with Israel, George Latimer, the Westchester County executive, said on Wednesday he would mount a Democratic primary challenge against Representative Jamaal Bowman of New York. The decision set the stage for a potentially explosive contest next year. It will be explosive, all right. That promises to test not only the growing Democratic divide over the war in the Middle East, but the durability of the party's progressive wing. I think it, definitely will be explosive, but I do kind of disagree with the people who are, out there being like this. If they lose this race, the progressive movement is over. It's done with. It's, completely finished. I would say, of course, people are trying to say that after some of the, AIPAC-fueled, DMFI-fueled, really bad losses for progressives in the past cycle. But, of course, that is not the reality. They're not saying that now. Or they're still saying that now, after all those losses happen, but they're still having the squad members, which by the way also did grow, are also continuing to have an influence, increasing influence, especially on this issue over the public conversations. That's certainly something to keep in mind. Decision is it's going to be a big race, but again, the progressive left will survive, no matter what here. But it's definitely something the progressive left has every duty. Everyone out there, has their duty to pour their support in, I think, here for Jamaal Bowman. Like other challengers, Latimer is expected to benefit from millions of dollars in outside spending from AIPAC and other associated special interest groups. The races in New York City suburbs, though, may prove the most significant. It pits a charismatic black progressive with growing national profile against an old-school white liberal with a decades-long political winning streak. And it will play out in a district that is home to one of the country's most influential Jewish communities, which is saying there's a bunch of, rich Jews that, work in very high, profile companies. It also happens to be the area where I grew up, or very close to the area where I grew up. So, that is certainly true. It's got like Scarsdale, which is one of the richest places in the country, but it's also got places like Yonkers and White Plains, and also, the northern tip of the Bronx, which are incredibly, diverse and also not nearly as wealthy. So it's definitely going to be, shall we say, friendly demographic constituencies for both of them here. Latimer stepped carefully around many of those fault lines as he outlined his candidacy this week, insisting that his campaign would go well beyond the issue of Israel. The Democrat, in his second term as the county executive, urged voters not to judge him on his age, 70, or the color of his skin. He said that if he was elected, I think a lot of people, they're not judging him on his age or the color of his skin. They're judging him on the fact that he is, we have already seen a trend of people bribing various politicians to run against pro-Palestinian politicians, and those people are doing the bribing, the Israeli lobby. But this is what they're going to try to do. They're going to be like, it's just they're just judging him on his age and the color of his skin. People don't like somebody who is just totally propped up by one entity and one interest group, clearly. And I think that's, at least in the early stages. Also, he has had some kind of weird race answers, just saying, I had a lot of black friends when I was younger, because I came from a poor, Mount Vernon, which is, very close to the Bronx. It's, much poorer than, the more you go up north, kind of the richer you get in Westchester County. But it is, very close to the Bronx and the city, also very diverse, also, not as rich. So it is definitely, a place that, given America being America, he just would have had to be around non-white people by choice. But, he's like, I had friends with them when I was younger. But, the biggest problem is his, really just being recruited, being parachuted in, essentially. It's kind of weird to say because, it is his county, he's county supervisor. But, they AIPAC and conversations, shall we say, are really what made this race happen. I think that is increasingly clear. Of course, this is somebody who has, he's kind of in a vulnerable situation. A kind of profound political vulnerability here for Bowman at age 47, and not just because of his stance on the war. The congressman has spent $185,000 in his campaign account, just $185,000 in the campaign account, and Vladimir's will be filled with much more than that from the Israel lobby. And in Washington on Wednesday, he was confronted by a fresh Republican push to censure him for pulling a fire alarm in the House office building in October. Honestly, I really doubt that's going to, especially with the heavily Democratic base, I don't think that's going to hurt him that much. It's going to be much more about, Israel. It's going to be about being too radical. It won't be because he did some shenanigans around Trump. And these are people who, by and large, aren't going to be really affected by a government shutdown. So, to be like, he's causing you to, it's not going to work. But this kind of finding any sort of perceived disloyalty towards Biden, which is definitely, it's been a strategy they've used in the past, and also, not condemning Hamas enough should be their two main lines of attack. But in what is set to be a very, very important race. So we got the sides stacking up here, the belligerents stacking up. AIPAC, which has probably offered support for Vladimir, it's several months ago. It's not detailed its spending plans. But Bowman's advisors and allies say defeating him could be far more difficult than his foes anticipate. Some of the left's most influential figures were already lining up to fight back, determined to show the staying power of their movement 3 years after they first helped Bowman, former middle school principal, topple a powerful 3-decade incumbent in Elliot Engel. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bowman's best-known ally in the state and also in the country, really, circulated a fundraising appeal on his behalf. New York's Working Families Party and Justice Democrats have pledged resources, and Bowman could also get a backup from J Street, a pro-Israel liberal counterweight to AIPAC that has endorsed him, which is pretty cool to see right off the bat. It's not a surprise that a super PAC that routinely targets black members of Congress with primary challenges and is funded by the same Republican mega donors who gave billions to election-denying Republicans, including Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, and Ted Cruz, have recruited a candidate for this race, as Emma Simon, spokesperson for Bowman's campaign, referring to AIPAC. The primary battle is one Democrats had hoped to avoid. No, it's not true. They're licking their chops for this chance to get Jamaal Bowman out. And you know what I say? Let's bring it on, all right? Come on. Jamaal Bowman, he had literally one bad vote. He is somebody who's been incredibly out front. He's been voting pretty much the right way on every bill. He's using his voice, one of the first people out there to call for a ceasefire. If you want to see a better world, you have to support the people actually in the position of power, putting themselves in some sort of, awkward position to fight for it. And I think this is the time, where I do say a lot on the show, I want people to take risks. I want politicians especially to take risks. That's why the squad is in place, to take those risks and have a grassroots army at their back. And this is the time where risks have been taken, and now I think Jamaal Bowman definitely needs the help of the squad base. I think that's why, I will certainly be donating to Jamaal Bowman at some point in the near future, and I encourage you to do as well.